Hi, I'm James Naylor Green, Professor of Brazilian History and Culture at Brown University and the National Co-Coordinator of the U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil. This program is supported by the Washington Brazil office. This is Brazil Unfiltered. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Jonathan Watts. Jonathan Watts is a British journalist serving as the global environmental editor of The Guardian. Based in the Amazon town of Altamira, in the state of Pará, he is one of the co-founders of Suma Uma, an independent news agency specializing in reporting from the Amazon. He has also reported from the Arctic, the Antarctic, Amazon, and several COP summits for the Guardian, covering, as he says, a lot of grim stuff I wish wasn't happening, and interviewing a lot of great people trying to stop it. Between 2012 and 2017, Watts was The Guardian's Latin American correspondent, where he interviewed political figures such as Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and Dilma Rousseff, and Bolivian President Evo Morales, among other political leaders of the region. He is the author of When a Billion Chinese Jump, which was translated into 4 languages. Jonathan, I'm so glad you could join us today on Brazil Unfiltered.
Thank you, James. Great to be here.
So you're currently environmental editor of the UK publication, The Guardian, and you live in Altamira in the Amazon with your wife, journalist, writer, and filmmaker Elaine Blum. Live there.
It seemed like the natural place to be at this stage in my life and my career and my relationship. It was a passion for the Amazon and journalism that brought Eliane and I together. 5 years ago, we and some other colleagues co-founded the Rainforest Journalism Fund, which aims to increase coverage of the rainforest. We thought that was essential. We thought that the Amazon does not get enough coverage because it's not easy to reach from the centers of money and power where most media are based. So for reporters in London or New York or even Sao Paulo, there aren't many opportunities to visit and learn and write about the Amazon. It's expensive and it's time consuming. And so we wanted to change that. The Amazon does deserve more coverage. It's important that the world values and understands the rainforest more than it does. It's essential for any effective climate solution. And so we set up the the Rainforest Journalism Fund. And then it just seemed a natural next step to move here ourselves, to put our bodies in the Amazon. Eliane went first to Altamira. I followed her. And, if you'd have asked me 10 or 20 years ago, I would never have imagined that I would live in the Amazon rainforest. I've been a city dweller all my life. I was born in London, moved to Manchester, then Osaka, Tokyo, Beijing, and Rio. This is totally different, but it does feel right at this stage. I've always tried in my journalism to follow the story, what I think the story is. And for me, this is now where the world's most important story is. So that's why I'm here. It feels right. This is where my priorities are right now.
So I actually myself came to Brazil through the Amazon, traveling down the Solimões before I got to Manaus. So I can appreciate your commitment to and your awe about the magic and the craziness of the Amazon rainforest. So you and other journalists, including Eliane Blum, founded Suma Uma, a news agency. Could you explain a little bit about that and how that operates as a news agency?
Yeah, I think it's something that Annie and I wanted to do at this stage in our careers. We're both in our mid-50s. We've covered a lot of different countries, a lot of different topics, and really pushed at the limits of mainstream journalism. And I think we've both, certainly I have written stories saying that business as usual in the world can't go on in the climate crisis. You need to change. You need to be willing to do things you've never done before. So we're trying to get away from journalism as usual and to experiment, to explore new ways of storytelling, to find new language of journalism, but most of all to have a new perspective. And I think that's where Sumoma comes in. The main idea of Sumoma is that it's centered on the Amazon. It's centered on life. You know, the Amazon is one of, if not the greatest hotspot for biodiversity in the world. So in terms of abundance or diversity, the Amazon is an exceptional place and essential in so many different ways to the world. So we want that to be the center of our values and our newspapers' values, rather than money or power, as newspapers tend to focus on when they're based in London or São Paulo or New York. So yeah, it's that shift, and the idea is that we take what we have had in our lives so far, our experience, our audience, our followers on Twitter and Facebook and so on. And Eliane's got a lot more than me in that regard, but that we use those to try to amplify forest voices, that we try to spend more time talking to indigenous people, riverine people, quilombolas, people who maybe normally don't get so much coverage, and we give more of a voice. So that's the idea. So different values, different perspective, and a louder voice for those who live and understand the forest.
So on the Sumoma website, I think you mentioned that the Amazon is the center of the world. And why do you believe that's so?
I think that's really what I was trying to get at in the last answer, that it's the center of life, and therefore it should be treated as the center of the world. That if we put life as the priority, and I don't just mean, you know, our lives as humans, clearly that's a big part of it, but that life on Earth and the continuation of life on Earth, abundance, and a long-term ability to sort of sustain a global system, then if you accept that, then it makes sense to make the Amazon a center instead of treating it as a faraway periphery, another resource to be exploited. It's a challenge to market thinking and political colonial thinking at the same time.
So about a year ago now, I think British journalist Don Phillips was murdered in the Amazon along with the indigenous specialist Bruno Pereira. It was a shock for everyone in Brazil when it took place. First of all, what is the current state of the investigation regarding their murders?
There have been a number of arrests in the case of these terrible murders. Dom was a very good friend of mine. I never met Bruno Pereira, but I know Dom admired him enormously, and everyone I spoke to about Bruno says what a fantastic and devoted, what a fantastic guy he was, and how devoted he was to the Amazon. The investigations have found what appears to be the killer, the person who actually pulled the trigger, and the people who were with him when they disposed of the bodies in a very brutal way. And now you're seeing efforts to see who supplied them with guns, who might have given them the orders. There is a guy who's nicknamed Colombia, who has been detained and may have connections to an illegal fishing syndicate, possibly even a narco-trafficking syndicate, although that's not yet proven. And recently, you also saw some Brazilian prosecutors say that the former head of, I believe it was one of the Brazilian agencies responsible for protection of that region, protection of indigenous people in that region, is also culpable because during the Bolsonaro administration, many of the government's functions were run down. So the kind of forest protection and indigenous protection agencies that should have been operating in the region and deterring illegal smuggling and illegal activities were severely depleted and unable to perform the tasks that they were assigned to do. So there's that question of culpability and responsibility and negligence have come into it.
So how dangerous is the region for journalists? Can you is it safe to be there for a person who's speaking out about the kind of the criminal activities that take place in the region, deforestation, illegal trafficking in woods and other products?
It's clearly not a safe place for journalists. I mean, we can see from what happened to Dom Phillips just how dangerous things can be at times. I think that was an exception. There have been very, very few killings of journalists of any type, certainly foreign journalists, in the Amazon rainforest in the last 20 or 30 years. Clearly, it's dangerous for environmental defenders and people trying to protect the rainforest and hold back extractive industries and illegal loggers, illegal fishermen, and so on. But Brazil generally is a dangerous place, and it's particularly dangerous in the Amazon, where the murder rate is higher. And you know, this is a dangerous beat. There are many of the people we talk to have, in many cases, a price on their head. Oh. They are targets. So normally it's not the journalists themselves who are the targets, but it's that you tend to be with people who are threatened, and I think that was the case with Dom. So yes, there are risks involved, but I think it's so important that I think those risks need to be faced.
Wow. So with the growing threat of climate change, the Amazon has been increasingly in the global media's eye in recent years. Do you still believe there are many misconceptions about this region in the United States and in Europe?
I think there are many, and I shared them before I first visited, and indeed before I lived there. I suppose the first one is that I don't think people understand just how deforested and degraded the Amazon is, because you can always find images of, you know, a vast canopy that make it look like, wow, it's like an endless green ocean. But just to understand the scale of the loss is so staggering and so quick. And when you fly over, increasingly, you know, I've been coming and going now for about 18 years, and increasingly you see areas being opened up here and there and everywhere, and roads moving in, and more centers of agriculture and more urban centers, and the population expanding. So I don't think that's fully grasped, is just how bad some of the areas are, areas of destruction are, especially in the south. And secondly, I would say that I don't think people fully understand how important the Amazon is. It's generally seen as like the lungs of the world, something that produces oxygen for the world, but that's not really the case. That the oxygen that the Amazon produces is not really globally important. It's locally important and regionally important, but the far more important function that the Amazon provides is as a pump, a biotic pump that pushes water and weather systems inland, because in most other parts of the world, when you get far inland regions, they often tend to be deserts, because the water systems from the oceans, caused by the oceans, have not reached that far inland. But in South America, the reason that it's so lush in such a wide area, it's largely because of the Amazon and other forests like the Mata Atlântica that transpire. And when they transpire, they're pushing weather systems across the region. The scientists call this, well, the biotic pump is the more scientific term, but in a more sort of poetic way of expressing it, they talk about flying rivers, and the fact that the Amazon is pushing flying rivers across the region, which of course is, you know, essential for irrigation. And the more you cut down the Amazon, the slower weather systems are going to be, and the less rain there's going to be, and the more likelihood there will be of droughts in other parts of South America.
Oh. So what has been the impact of the Bolsonaro government's policies on the Amazon when the 4 years he was in government? That's an important thing for us to understand.
The Bolsonaro administration was essentially a wrecking ball for environmental protection and Amazonian protection. This was done through a number of different ways. The Environment Agency was weakened. It has fewer staff. The forest protection agencies have less helicopters and a weaker mandate to act in the field. There were far less environmental penalties levied during this period. And so there was that running down of the administration, the Environmental Administration, Amazonian Administration, protection for indigenous people as well, which is a crucial part of this. And then on the other side, there was encouragement in terms of words and bills proposed in Congress for those who want to move into the Amazon and take more land illegally, mine for gold illegally, set fires illegally, and just open up the Amazon in all sorts of ways for short-term economic exploitation or just land acquisition, and through that kind of capital, an increase in sort of assets. So that happened at a breakneck pace through the statements of Bolsonaro, through the laws that were proposed in Congress. And in those 4 years of Bolsonaro, you saw a 60% increase in deforestation, which is the sharpest increase under any political term since records began. So it was a horror story. And it's important to remember it's not just deforestation that's the problem. There's also degradation of the forest. They're two distinct things. One is total clearance of the forest, which of course is devastating and is captured by satellites. But the other degradation is where you cut underneath the canopy. Maybe you cut some trees, but not all of them. Maybe you start gold mining under the canopy and poison the rivers. Maybe you hunt more. All of these kinds of activities weaken the forest and make it more vulnerable to fire. So we now have a situation where something like 17% of the forest is gone, completely gone, deforested, and another 17 to 30% is degraded and therefore more vulnerable. And we're approaching what's called, what scientists have called a tipping point, whereby the forest might not be able to replenish itself.
And that measuring point is what year that 70% has gone compared to when? What's the marker for that? How do we kind of make that decision?
The 17% is essentially since the start of deforestation, which really began during the military dictatorship in the 70s, when the road building began and the policy of settling the Amazon, which was, it was a national security strategy pushed forward by generals who felt that the Amazon was threatened by foreign powers because it has huge resources, and that therefore, and that the people who lived there, the indigenous people, couldn't be trusted because they didn't have a great alliance to the Brazilian state. Obviously, they predated the Brazilian state in many cases. And so they wanted more sort of trustable, generally white people, settlers to move in as a sort of strategic bulkhead. So they encouraged this movement into the Amazon that continues today. And you still hear among the right, you still hear the same justification today.
So since the Lula government was elected in October of 22 and assumed power on January 1st, 23, what have been the changes in policies towards the Amazon?
It's been very dramatic in terms of rhetoric, and to some extent also in terms of practice. It's normal that we've only had 5 months of this government, so it hasn't really had time to make huge changes. But First of all, the government set really ambitious goals: zero deforestation in the Amazon and other biomes by 2030, a halt to the expansion of the agricultural frontier for the first time in 500 years, essentially. These are huge goals in and of themselves. And then you have a dramatic shift in the treatment and power sharing with indigenous people. And this is key because not just on a moral, ethical basis, because indigenous people have lived there and are the original owners and users of this land, but also because this indigenous people and indigenous territories have been proven to be the place that the places that are best at protecting biodiversity and drawing down carbon. So this Lula has appointed the first ever indigenous minister, created, in fact, the Ministry of Indigenous Affairs that never existed before. And you have an indigenous leader, Sonia Guajajara, who has that post. He's also, for the first time, put an indigenous person in charge of indigenous affairs. Nobody thought of that for 500 years. And finally, that is happening. And last month, we saw an announcement of the demarcation of half a dozen new indigenous territories with a promise of more to come. So all of that's happened, plus the new environment minister, Marina Silva, who did a fantastic job when she was last environment minister in the first Lula administration between about 2003 and I think it was 2008. She's back, and she has said that all public lands, unallocated public lands, will not, there will not, no forest cutting will be allowed on any of those lands. No activity will be permitted of that sort will be permitted on those lands, which is also a huge change, because those areas cover something like the size of Spain.
Wow.
Those allocated lands, and there's a raft of other things. There's a lot more penalties for people who illegally clear their land, and there has been a big push to drive out illegal gold miners from indigenous territories, which is a huge issue because they pollute, the Amazon's glorious rivers, mighty rivers, but being polluted with mercury and arsenic and other mining minerals. So there's a big push to drive out thousands of illegal miners, and that's a really major thing. It requires helicopter operations, armed interventions, because increasingly, especially in the last 5 years, narco traffickers have become involved in running protection rackets for these illegal mines. So there's a hell of a lot going on. There's some controversies. We can talk about those. There's some areas.
I was just about to ask you that. So there is a controversy within the Lula cabinet regarding the exploration of oil that's been found in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of the mouth of the Amazon River near Belém do Pará, which is the mouth. And this seems to be the first big test for the Lula's pro-environmental discourse. How are you understanding this controversy that's taking place at this very moment?
Yeah, I mean, this is a key test, as you say, and it's something that Sumaoma has focused on right from the beginning. We've broken heaps of stories on this. Most recently, the decision by the Environment Protection Agency to block all further oil exploration in this mouth of the Amazon region, the Foz do Amazonas, as it's called, by Petrobras, which is Brazil's biggest oil company. So that is a huge test, because clearly there are billions of dollars at stake. There's going to be a pushback. In fact, it's already begun by Petrobras, by the governors of the states that could have maybe made a lot of money from these projects. And it's worth noting that almost all the governors in the Amazon states are Bolsonarists. So Bolsonaro might have lost the last election, but his supporters got many other key political posts in terms of governorships and in Congress and in the Senate. So this is going to be a huge test, and we will see where Lula's instincts are now, because in the past he has been very, very much in favor of expansion by Petrobras. Lula his background is as a trade unionist. He wants jobs. He wants to boost the economy. He wants to relieve poverty. All of these things cost money, and in 20th century thinking, the best way to get money is to drill for oil. And now in the 21st century thinking, there is the counter case that the more you pump oil and the more you burn oil, the more actually you wreck the environment and do incredible damage in other ways. And I think Lula he's a 20th century trade union guy deep down, and he gets the environment now. Marina says that he's really understands it much more, and that a lot of these targets on deforestation, for example, come from Lula, not just from her. But it's a big test, and I think Lula's going to need international support, like hard cash, not just nice words, to give something back in another way, to say that his environmental policies are not just holding back Brazil; they're actually helping develop Brazil, but in a positive and more sustainable direction. So big test, yes.
And so what is the current strength? You mentioned the number of governors in the region who are aligning politically with Bolsonaro and the conservative movements in Brazil. But what is the actual political force of the mining and agribusiness interests that are causing such environmental damage in the region?
Oh, it's phenomenal. They utterly dominate Congress. The Ruralista bancada, which is the caucus, the agricultural caucus, essentially. They are the strongest force in Congress and the Senate. Mining interests or agricultural interests dominate, I think, all but one of the Amazonian governorships. The one possible exception, although it's questionable where his loyalties really lie, is in the state of Pará, where you have the governor Helder Barbalho, who answers partly to a big urban base in Belém, but also he's been willing to get in discussions with the Workers' Party, with Lula, with environmentalists, with foreign agencies. He's been very prominent in places like the World Economic Forum at Davos, talking about the bioeconomy and efforts to generate funds from protecting the forest, growing the forest, agroforestry, carbon credits, these sorts of things. So he's a big advocate of that. So it will be very interesting. I think Pará is going to be a kind of a model of whether Brazil can move in a new direction, or whether it's just going to be stuck in the old extractivist model of just producing goods for other countries to make money out of and to consume.
So what can a young activist, a student, person who is reading and learning about the Amazon, maybe through the articles that you and Eliana Bloom and others have written, living in the United States, living in the UK, what can they do concretely to defend the Amazonian rainforests and the environment in this region of the world?
I think the answer always to these kinds of things is political, first and foremost. When you vote, vote for people who care about the environment, first of all, and the climate, because I think they're most likely to engage in a positive way with other countries like Brazil. Not always, and so if you have the energy to follow up, join organizations that can increase the influence and weight of an individual's opinion through letters, through campaigning, through lobbying in political circles. I think support organizations like Suma Uma, and there are many others doing great work like Amazonia Real and Repórter Brasil, and independent media. We are trilingual. Many of the others also have an English service, so that will help us. And then, you always get to the consumption issue. Be careful what you consume. Try to put pressure on supermarkets not to stack products that are connected to deforestation. And that is, you can find that out now. There are organizations that trace things much more than in the past. And also lobby, I hope, for laws similar to the one recently passed by the European Union, which has enacted, for the first time, mandatory controls on companies so that they are not allowed to import products connected to deforestation in other countries, not just Brazil, but also Indonesia or Congo. That includes things like rubber, timber, beef, soy, all of these products. It's quite strong now, that the European Union's laws, and it would be great if others could follow.
Yeah. Did you think that the Mercosur, the negotiations between the European Union and the Mercosur might kind of collapse over the question of the Amazon and the extractive forces that are taking place, and the unwillingness of the Mercosur to trade with the southern parts of South America if they're in fact damaging the environment?
I don't know if it's reached that stage yet, but I would hope that was something that they consider very, very closely. And I would hope that negotiators are willing to collapse the agreement if Brazil and other countries involved in deforestation, Argentina's doing a great deal, and other Amazonian countries have their own problems. That, I hope it does become an absolutely central concern in negotiations. That's all about putting life first and putting it at the center rather than the periphery, something you deal with later, something that's off the balance books. So yes, I hope it's right at the center and could become a sticking point.
So how do you answer people or engage with people who, from the global south, who raise the question, look, the global north devastated its rainforest, or it's not its rainforest, its forests, and cut them down and use that to grow their economies. And now you're asking the global south to stop doing that. And kind of, is there a fairness to that kind of demand by the global north, would you say?
I wouldn't say the global north in itself can make that demand. I would say the global north has to provide the means to make the protection possible. The global north is more responsible than the global south. This won't work unless the global north stumps up the cash. It must take responsibility. Almost definitely most of the deforestation has been caused by the demand for goods that eventually went to the global north. So the fairness needs to be front and center, or this won't work and it will be meaningless. That argument, the historical argument you make, is entirely valid and is entirely worth raising every single time. The only slight difference might be that awareness of what it means to cut down a forest has progressed a great deal in the last 30 or 40 years. So the consequences are clearer. I don't think it was right when it was done before, but maybe people thought they could endlessly cut down forests because it just seemed like there was no end in sight. But clearly it was short-sighted, destructive, the worst kind of colonial thinking. And it's nobody should try to defend that ever.
So you've lived in Brazil a long time now. How optimistic are you about its future?
I'm a sort of what do they say? I think it was William Golding who said a universal pessimist and cosmic optimist. So in the short term, I can see an awful lot of reasons to be concerned. And for that matter, in the long term. But I also see a lot more potential for change in Brazil than in my home country, the UK, where I am now, by the way, for some medical treatment. But I think there's more dynamism, I feel, in a place like Altamira, more awareness of what nature is amongst the people who live there because they're closest to it. And I think, like, when I'm back here in London, it does feel as though those sorts of things are very far away and that people can kind of push them to the back of their minds much more than they do in the Amazon. So in that sense, I am more optimistic for Brazil, but my God, it's going to be messy. And it's not going to be easy. But yeah, there's a lot of very brilliant people trying to do the right thing, as well as some very unscrupulous people just trying to make as much money as they can all the time, just regardless of the cost to the forest and the people who live there.
Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us today on Brazil Unfiltered. I really appreciated your coming to be with us.
Thank you, James, for doing this interview, and best regards to all your students.
So I hope that you've enjoyed this interview. If you are watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do so. If you are listening to this broadcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts, please leave us a 5-star review. It helps other people find the program. Have a great week. Until next time, até a próxima.